What would you do if you were invited to a dinner party where you were the punchline? I'm currently standing in the Vance mansion, watching my CEO's wife point at my shoes and whisper to a senator. They think I'm a mouse, they think I'm invisible. But I've spent 3 years as their assistant, recording every bribe, every lie, and every drop of blood they spilled to reach the top. Tonight, I'm not just an employee. I'm the prosecutor. But there's one problem. I just realized my mother's name is on the very first bribe. Now, I have to decide. Do I burn the Vances, or do I protect the woman who lied to me for 20 years? They say the elite of Miami don't see people. They see assets. Or they see obstacles. For 3 years, I was neither. I was invisible. A ghost in a cheap polyester suit, carrying soy lattes for a man who didn't know my last name. My name is Maya. And today was the day I realized that being a ghost has one major advantage. You see everything. You hear everything. And you know exactly where the bodies are buried. It was sitting on my desk. Cream-colored cardstock. Gold foil. The kind of paper that costs more than my monthly rent. An evening of elegance, hosted by Evelyn Vance. I knew what it was. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Evelyn, the CEO's wife, had spent months making my life a living hell. She didn't want me there because she liked me. She wanted a footstool. She wanted to show her friends what poverty looked like up close. She thought she was inviting a victim to her table. She had no idea she was inviting the executioner. Before I tell you what happened when I walked through those doors, look at the red button. If you're the kind of person who stands by while the innocent are bullied, then keep scrolling. But if you believe in justice, real, cold, calculated justice, then subscribe now. Don't be the person who watches from the sidelines. And if you're too afraid to join us, go to the comments and tell everyone exactly why you'd rather stay silent while the villains win. The air in the Vance mansion didn't smell like oxygen. It smelled like money, a cloying mixture of expensive lilies, aged scotch, and the cold metallic scent of air conditioning turned down to 60 degrees. It was the kind of cold that was designed to let you know you were in a place where the outside world, with its heat and its struggle, couldn't reach you. I stood in the foyer, my hand tightening on the strap of my mother's vintage clutch. The silk of my gown felt like armor, but under the lights of the $50,000 chandelier, I felt exposed. I saw them before they saw me. A sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, drifting through the great hall like schools of predatory fish. These were the power players of Miami, real estate moguls who had displaced thousands to build their luxury condos. Politicians whose votes were bought over appetizers. And in the center of it all, Evelyn Vance. She was wearing a gown that probably cost more than my 4-year degree, a shimmering, silver scale-like fabric that made her look like a literal shark. She was holding a martini glass as if it were a scepter, laughing at something a man in a navy suit was saying. I took a step forward. My heart was a drum in my chest, beating a rhythm of pure, unadulterated defiance. Maya? Is that you? I turned. It was Sarah, the senior receptionist from the office. She was wearing a dress that was clearly a season old, looking just as uncomfortable as I should have been. She looked at my midnight blue silk, her eyes widening. Maya, you look incredible. But Evelyn, she told everyone you were coming in a costume. She told the waitstaff to treat you like a server if you showed up in your usual rags. I leaned in close to Sarah. Let her try, Sarah. Tonight, the only thing being served is the truth. I didn't wait to be announced. I walked straight toward the center of the room. I felt the eyes. One by one, the conversations died. It started at the periphery and moved inward, a wave of silence that followed me. They were looking for the charity case Evelyn had promised. They weren't prepared for the woman who walked in like she owned the foundation the house was built on. Evelyn turned. The smile on her face didn't just fade, it curdled. Maya, she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that could rot your teeth. You're late. And you're wearing that. She scanned my dress. I saw the moment she recognized the quality of the silk. I saw the flash of confusion and then the sharpening of her gaze. I didn't realize the intern salary paid for vintage Dior. She said, loud enough for the circle of socialites to hear. Or did you find that in the back of a costume shop? It's very theatrical. It's an heirloom, Evelyn, I said. My voice carried. I wanted it to. It belonged to my mother. She wore it the last time she was on this property. Back when it was still a home, and not a monument to vanity. The room went cold. Julian Vance, who had been standing a few feet away, stepped forward. He looked at me with those cold, calculating eyes, the eyes of a man who viewed people as numbers on a balance sheet. "Maya," he said, his voice a low warning. "This is a celebration, let's not bring up the past. Why don't you head to the dining room? We've put you at the far end, near the sterling representatives. I thought you might want to see how real business is done before we let you go on Monday." "Before we let you go?" He said it so casually, like he was talking about taking out the trash. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Julian," I replied. The dining room was a cavern of gold. The table was 40 feet long. At the head sat Julian and Evelyn. At the other end, tucked into a corner where the light was dim and the draft from the kitchen was strongest, was my place card. But next to me wasn't another assistant. It was Arthur Sterling, the patriarch of the Sterling Group, the man who held the Vance's future in his hand. Evelyn had put me there as a joke. She thought putting the office mouse next to the most powerful man in the room would make me wither with social anxiety. She thought I'd be a stuttering mess, highlighting his greatness by my own insignificance. She was wrong. Arthur Sterling was an older man, with hair like silver wire and eyes that had seen every trick in the book. He didn't look at my dress. He looked at my eyes. "You're the one who wrote the site analysis for the North Bay project," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am," I said, picking up my water glass. My hand was steady as a rock. It was the only honest document in the entire prospectus. Sterling whispered, leaning in. "Why is a girl with your talent working for a man like Julian Vance?" "Because, Mr. Sterling," I said, "it's much easier to dismantle a building when you're standing inside the walls." The first course was served. Lobster bisque that tasted like salt and pretension. Evelyn was holding court at the other end of the table, loud and performative. And then I told the decorator. Evelyn laughed. I said, "I want the ballroom to feel like we're on a private island. I don't care about the cost. After tonight, the cost won't matter." She looked down the length of the table, her eyes locking onto mine. She saw me talking to Arthur Sterling. I saw the vein in her neck pulse. She couldn't stand it. I was supposed to be cowering, not conversing. "Maya, darling," she shouted across the table, silencing the other guests. "Arthur is a very busy man. Don't bore him with your little office stories. Why don't you tell the table about your father? Julian mentioned he was a landowner here once. Tell us what happened to all that wealth." The entire table went quiet. It was a calculated strike. She was outing my poverty to the richest people in Miami, trying to strip me of my dignity before the main course was even served. I felt the heat rise in my chest. This was it. The moment she thought she would break me. I looked at Arthur Sterling. He was watching me, waiting to see if I would crumble or fight. I looked at Julian. He was drinking his wine, enjoying the show. I set my spoon down. The sound hit the china like a gunshot. "You want to know what happened to my father's land, Evelyn?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. "I think you should ask your husband. Because he's the one who signed the documents. And I think Mr. Sterling would be very interested to know that the land this house is sitting on was never actually Julian's to sell." Julian's wine glass hit the table. The red liquid spreading across the white cloth like a bloodstain. The silence that followed my words wasn't empty. It was heavy. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a skyscraper collapses. Julian Vance stared at the red wine soaking into the heirloom lace tablecloth. It looked like a fresh wound. His face, usually a mask of tanned, surgical perfection, was beginning to twitch. He didn't look at me. He looked at Arthur Sterling. That was his first mistake. He was more afraid of the billionaire's judgment than he was of the truth. "Maya," Julian said, his voice a low, vibrating growl. "You've had too much to drink. You're making scenes. Evelyn, have the staff escort her out." Evelyn didn't need to be told twice. She snapped her fingers, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it felt physical. Two large men in black suits, private security masquerading as event staff, began to move from the shadows of the foyer toward my chair. Wait. It was Arthur Sterling. He didn't look at the security guards, he looked at Julian. "Julian," Sterling said, his voice calm, like a judge passing sentence. "You told me the title for the North Bay acreage was cleared in 2005. You told me the previous owners were compensated and deceased." I felt the tears prickling my eyes. But I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of the ghosts of the people who stole my childhood. The compensation was a lie, Mr. Sterling, I said. My voice was cracking, but I pushed through it. My father, Silas Thorne, was compensated with a lawsuit that drained his life savings and a non-disclosure agreement he was forced to sign while he was on a ventilator. They didn't buy the land. They suffocated it. That's enough. Evelyn shrieked. She was standing now, her face pale under the spray tan. She's a disgruntled employee. She's been stealing files from the archive. We have her on camera. This is a pathetic attempt at extortion. The two security guards reached my chair. One of them grabbed my upper arm. His grip was like a vice, bruising the silk of my mother's dress. Get your hands off her. It wasn't Julian who said it. It was Marcus, the junior partner. He had stood up at the other end of the table. Julian, if she has the original deed, we can't sign the merger. The Sterling Group will be liable for the title dispute. We have to hear her out. Julian's eyes darted around the room. He saw the doubt on the faces of his investors. He saw the cameras of the social media influencers. Evelyn had invited. Those cameras were now pointed directly at the bloodstain on the table. Marcus, sit down, Julian hissed. Maya is mentally unstable. She's been obsessed with this Thorne legacy since she started. It's a fantasy. He looked at the guards and gave a sharp nod. They hauled me out of the chair. My heels skidded on the marble. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just looked at Arthur Sterling as they dragged me toward the kitchen doors. Check the 2005 Series B signatures, Arthur. I shouted over my shoulder. Check the notary's name. It was Evelyn's maiden name. She notarized her own husband's theft. The guards didn't take me to the front door. They took me through the service entrance, past the bewildered caterers and the piles of dirty dishes. They threw me out into the alleyway behind the mansion. The rain was coming down in sheets now. Within seconds, my mother's silk dress was ruined, clinging to me like a second skin. I sat there in the mud, the cold water washing the makeup off my face. I felt small. For a moment, I felt like that 8-year-old girl again, watching the moving trucks take our furniture. But then I felt the flash drive in my hand. I hadn't let go. Even when they dragged me, I held onto it like a lifeline. Maya? It was Marcus. He had slipped out the back. He was holding my coat, his face etched with a mixture of fear and admiration. They're signing it, Maya, he whispered, stepping into the rain. Julian convinced Sterling it was a hoax. They're signing the merger papers right now. In 30 minutes, the money transfers. You'll never be able to touch them after that. I looked up at him through my wet hair. Let them sign it, Marcus. What? You don't understand. If they sign, the legal shield kicks in. You'll be sued for defamation into the next century. No, I said, standing up, my voice turning cold and sharp. You don't understand. I didn't just come here to stop the merger. I came here to ensure the Sterling Group buys a sinking ship. If they sign those papers after my public warning, Julian isn't just a thief anymore. He's a fraudster who defrauded a billion-dollar conglomerate. I walked toward my Honda, the mud squelching under my ruined heels. Marcus, I called out over the roar of the storm. Do you still have access to the firm's internal server? The one Julian thinks is encrypted? Yes. Why? Because, I said, opening my car door. I didn't just record the dinner. I uploaded a virus to the firm's mainframe when I searched for files this afternoon. At midnight, every single email Julian Vance has sent for the last 10 years, every bribe, every threat, every fake deed is going to be sent to the Miami Herald and the SEC. I looked back at the glowing lights of the mansion. Evelyn wanted a project? Well, she's about to become the lead witness in a federal investigation. But as I put the car in gear, I saw a black SUV pull out of the mansion's gates behind me. It didn't have its lights on. It was following me. Julian wasn't going to wait for the law. He was coming to take that flash drive back. My heart wasn't just beating. It was slamming against my ribs like a bird in a cage. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Through the blurred streaks of the storm, I saw them, 2 circles of cold, white LED light. The black SUV was gaining. Julian didn't send the police. He didn't send lawyers. He sent the kind of men who make problems disappear in the dark of a Miami hurricane. I looked down at my hands on the steering wheel. They were covered in mud from the mansion garden. My mother's silk dress, the only thing I had left of her, was heavy, wet, and smelled like failure. I remembered her voice. I remembered her sitting at the vanity 20 years ago, brushing her hair. Maya, she'd say, don't ever let them see you cry. A thorn woman only bows her head to check the sharpness of her blade. I didn't feel like a thorn right now. I felt like a girl in a dying Honda, being hunted by a predator with an unlimited gas tank. I floored it. The Honda groaned, the needle climbing past 80. I dodged a slow-moving truck, the horn blaring behind me like a funeral dirge. The SUV didn't flinch. It swerved with me, effortless and terrifying. They wanted the drive. They wanted the digital ghost of their crimes. But more than that, Julian wanted me silent. He knew that if I reached the city, if I reached a place with cameras and witnesses, his empire was a house of cards in a wind tunnel. I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling. I needed to call Marcus. No. Marcus was inside. He was surrounded. I was alone. Is this what you wanted, Dad? I whispered to the empty passenger seat. Is this worth it? I was 8 years old. It was a Tuesday. I remember the men didn't even take their shoes off. They walked across our cream-colored rugs with muddy boots, sticking property of the bank stickers on my piano, on the fridge, on my toy box. My father was standing in the foyer, the same foyer I had just been dragged out of. He was holding a piece of paper, his face gray. Julian Vance was there. He looked younger, but his eyes were the same. He was smiling. It's just business, Silas, Julian had said, patting my father on the shoulder while his men took our life apart. You didn't read the fine print. The land reverts to the developer if the milestone isn't met. And look, no milestone. My father didn't fight. He just looked at me, and in that moment I saw the light go out of his eyes. He died 2 years later, not of a heart attack, but of the sheer exhaustion of being a little man in a big man's world. The SUV had tapped my bumper. A PIT maneuver in the making. My car swerved toward the concrete barrier of the I-95. No, I screamed. I gripped the wheel, pulling it back. In that second, something changed. The sadness, the memory of my father's broken face, it curdled. It turned into a cold, hard knot of white-hot fury. I didn't care about the dress anymore. I didn't care about the car. I slammed on my brakes. The SUV flew past me, its brakes hissing as it tried to compensate. I didn't wait. I spun the wheel and took the exit for the port of Miami. I knew every inch of these docks. My father used to take me here to watch the ships. He used to say, Maya, the ocean doesn't care how much money you have. It swallows everyone the same. I pulled into the maze of shipping containers, turning off my lights. I sat in the darkness, the rain drumming on the roof. I watched the entrance. 10 seconds passed. 20. Then, the white LED lights crawled into view, searching for me like the eyes of a deep-sea monster. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the flash drive. I didn't just have the deed on here. I had the link to the virus. Come and get it, Julian, I whispered. The shipping containers towered over me like rusted giants. In the dark, they formed a labyrinth that the SUV couldn't navigate quickly. I wasn't hiding because I was afraid. I was hiding because I needed 3 minutes. 3 minutes of uninterrupted connection to the Vance Group's private cloud. I pulled my laptop from under the driver's seat. The screen glowed, casting a ghostly blue light over my wet face. My reflection looked back at me, smeared mascara, damp hair, but my eyes were the sharpest they'd been in years. You thought I was just an assistant, Julian, I whispered to the screen. You thought I was the girl who organized your calendar. You never realized I was the one who wrote the code for your internal filing system. I didn't just plant a virus. I planted a mirror. Every time Julian Vance deleted a file over the last 6 months, a ghost copy was sent to a secure server in Switzerland. Every time Evelyn used the corporate card for her charity galas, which were actually just money laundering fronts for Julian's offshore kickbacks, a receipt was generated and timestamped. I hit the execute key. On my screen, a progress bar began to crawl. 0%, 5%, 12%. This wasn't just about the land anymore. This was about the $400 million the Sterling Group was about to wire into a fraudulent account. If that money touched Julian's bank, it would be gone in seconds, funneled through shell companies in the Caymans. I had to intercept the proof of title document they were currently digital signing at the mansion. They were close. I could hear the crunch of their boots. They had found my car. I watched the progress bar, 45%. I looked at the file I was currently uploading to the Miami Herald's tip line. It wasn't a deed. It was a birth certificate. My father hadn't just lost the land. He had lost his mind trying to prove who he was. Julian had spent decades telling the world Silas Thorne was a drifter. A man with no family, a man who had abandoned his property. But I had the DNA results. I had the letters Julian's father had written to my grandfather. The Vances didn't just steal land. They stole a bloodline. They rebranded the Thorne estate as Vance Heights. They erased us from the map. "I know you're in here, Maya," a voice shouted. It was one of the guards. "Julian says we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Just give us the drive and you walk away. He'll even give you a severance package, 6 figures, more than you'll make in a decade." I looked at the screen. 88%. 6 figures? I whispered to myself. That's the price of my father's soul to you? 100%. Upload successful. Recipients: SEC, FBI, Miami Herald, Sterling Group Legal. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I closed the laptop, tucked the flash drive into my bodice, and stepped out of the car. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The 2 guards were standing 10 feet away, their flashlights blinding me. They looked like silhouettes of monsters. "I don't want the money," I said, my voice echoing through the steel canyon of the docks. "Then, what do you want, girl?" The lead guard growled, stepping into the light. I smiled. It was the smile of someone who had already won. "I want you to check your phones," I said. "Because in exactly 5 seconds, your boss's bank accounts are going to be frozen, and I don't think he's going to be able to pay your hourly rate anymore." The guards froze. They looked at each other, then slowly reached for their phones. I saw the blue light hit their faces. I saw their eyes go wide. But then, the lead guard looked back at me, his expression turning from confusion to pure, cold malice. "Julian might be going down," he hissed, stepping toward me. "But he gave us one last instruction before the funds froze. He said if we couldn't get the drive, to make sure you couldn't testify." He lunged at me. The lead guard, a man twice my size, moved with a speed that didn't match his bulk. I dodged to the left, my heels slipping in the mud. I felt the wind of his fist whistle past my ear. I wasn't a fighter. I was a girl who spent her weekends reading land surveys and legal precedents. But fear? Fear is a hell of a teacher. I scrambled back, my hands scraping against the rusted corrugated steel behind me. The second guard was circling around, cutting off my exit toward the main road. I was trapped between 2 steel walls and a dozen years of Vance's dirty secrets. "Give us the drive, Maya," the guard growled. He didn't look like a professional anymore. He looked like a man who knew his paycheck had just evaporated and was looking for someone to blame. "Give it to us, and maybe we'll just leave you here in the dark." Suddenly, a blinding pair of high beams cut through the darkness from the far end of the alley. The guards shielded their eyes, cursing. "Who the hell is that?" "I believe the lady told you to check your phones." I squinted through the light. My heart stopped. It wasn't Julian. It wasn't the police. It was Arthur Sterling. The billionaire stepped into the light, looking as composed as if he were walking into a boardroom meeting instead of a rain-soaked shipping dock at midnight. Behind him stood 2 men, real security. Not the street thugs Julian hired, but professionals in gray suits with the cold, vacant stares of former special forces. "Mr. Sterling?" My voice was a mere breath. Sterling didn't look at me yet. He looked at the 2 guards. "Julian Vance just attempted to sign a contract with my firm using a forged power of attorney. That is a federal crime. If you touch that woman, you become co-conspirators in a kidnapping and assault charge that my legal team will ensure carries a maximum sentence." He leaned forward slightly. "And since I've already put a stop payment on the Vance Group's accounts, you're currently working for free. Is Julian Vance worth 20 years in Rayford to you?" Sterling walked toward me. He reached into his coat and pulled out a clean white handkerchief, handing it to me. I looked at my hands, bleeding, muddy, shaking. "You have a lot of nerve, Maya Thorne," he said. The way he said my real name, it felt like a baptism. "I have a lot of reasons," I replied, wiping the grime from my face. "I saw the files," Sterling said, his eyes scanning the laptop I was still clutching. "My legal team flagged the ghost copies the moment your virus hit the server. You didn't just sabotage the merger. You've effectively dismantled one of the largest architectural firms in the Southeast in under 20 minutes. It took 20 years to prepare, I said. The 20 minutes was just the delivery. Sterling looked at the mansion lights glowing in the distance. Julian is frantic. He's trying to move assets as we speak. He doesn't know the FBI is already at the perimeter of his estate. But there's a problem. A problem? I asked. The deed, Sterling said, his voice dropping. The digital copies are enough for a criminal case, but to reclaim the Thorn land, to actually take back what was stolen, you need the original physical document. The one with the wet ink signatures from 2005. Without it, the land stays in receivership for decades. You'll win the war, but you'll never get your home back. I felt the weight of the flash drive in my hand. The original. It's not in the archives. I looked. I know, Sterling said. Julian keeps a private safe in the library of that mansion. It's fireproof, waterproof, and isolated from the grid. He wouldn't trust a digital copy of the one thing that could actually destroy him. I looked at the mansion. It looked like a fortress. He's still in there, I whispered. And the police are coming. If he knows it's over, he'll burn that safe. He'll destroy the evidence before they breach the door. Then we have about 12 minutes, Sterling said, gesturing to his car. I can get you past the gate. But once we're inside, you're the only one who knows the layout of that house. I looked at my ruined dress. I looked at the dark water of the bay. Let's go, I said. I have one more thing to say to Evelyn before the lights go out. Coming back to the mansion felt like walking back into a dream that had turned into a nightmare. But this time, I wasn't the help. I wasn't the project. Arthur Sterling's SUV glided past the iron gates. The security guards at the front didn't stop us. They were too busy staring at their phones, watching their world collapse in real time. Sterling looked at me, his face a mask of stone. You have 5 minutes once you're inside, he whispered. The FBI is 3 miles out. Once they cordon off the area, I can't protect you from the bureaucracy. Find the safe, get the deed. I stepped out of the car. My feet hit the gravel, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt a strange, vibrating clarity. I knew the service entrance. I knew the code to the library. It was the same code Julian used for everything. The date he made his first million. The library was dark, illuminated only by the rhythmic flash of the blue and red police lights reflecting off the bay windows. I moved like a shadow. I didn't need a flashlight. I had memorized the blueprints of this house 6 months ago. I moved to the mahogany bookshelf behind Julian's desk. I felt for the hidden latch, the one I'd seen him touch 1,000 times while I was bringing him his midnight coffee. There it was. The safe, cold, black steel. But as I reached for the dial, I heard a sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. I knew you'd come for the paper, Maya. You always were a sentimental little mouse. I spun around. I expected to see Julian. I expected to see a gun. Instead, I saw Marcus. He was sitting in Julian's leather chair, a glass of scotch in one hand and a cigarette in the other. He looked different. The worried ally act was gone. His tie was loosened, and there was a predatory glint in his eyes I'd never seen before. Marcus? My voice was a whisper. What are you doing? The police are coming. We have to get the deed. Marcus stood up. He walked toward me, and I noticed he was holding a manila folder. The original deed isn't in the safe, Maya. I took it out an hour ago. While you were playing fast and furious at the docks, I was doing real work. Why? You said you wanted to help me. You said you hated what they did to my father. I do hate what they did, Marcus said, his voice turning cold. They were sloppy. They stole $1 billion legacy and left a trail a secretary could follow. I didn't help you because I cared about your father, Maya. I helped you because I wanted Julian out of the way. I needed a victim to trigger the SEC investigation so I could take over the firm during the liquidation. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the floor. But then you had to go and mention the 2005 signatures. You had to bring up the notary. Take a look, Maya, Marcus hissed. I opened the folder. My eyes scanned the yellowing paper. There was my father's signature. There was Julian's. And there, in the corner, was the notary's stamp. Evelyn's maiden name wasn't on the stamp. The name on the stamp was Marcus's mother. My father didn't just get cheated by the Vances. He was betrayed by his own legal counsel. Marcus's family had been our family friends. They were the ones who told my father to trust the Vances. They were the ones who made sure the loophole was invisible. My family built the Vances, Marcus whispered, his face inches from mine. And I'm not going to let a mouse burn down my inheritance just because she wants justice. You want the deed? You're going to have to trade for it. Marcus. Where is she? It was Julian. He sounded frantic, breathless. I heard the metallic click of a handgun being readied. I looked at Marcus. He looked at the door, then back at me. He held the deed over a shredder that was humming on the desk. Choose, Maya, Marcus said. Sign the statement saying I was the one who uncovered the fraud, or I turn this paper into confetti and you lose your home forever. The air in the room was electric. To my left, Julian Vance, the man who stole my past, was holding a weapon with a trembling hand. To my right, Marcus, the man I thought was my future, was holding the only proof of my legacy over a machine that would turn it into dust. Most people would scream. Most people would beg. But in that moment I felt a strange cold peace wash over me. I realized that both of these men were playing a game of checkers, while I was the one who had built the board. I looked at the shredder. I looked at the deed. Then, I did something neither of them expected. I sat down. Put the gun down, Julian, I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. Someone older. Someone dangerous. And Marcus? If you want to shred that paper, do it. It's been scanned into the Sterling Group's mainframe for 30 minutes already. You're lying, Marcus hissed, his hand hovering over the shredder. You didn't have time. I didn't need time, I said, leaning back into the leather chair. I needed a connection. Remember the virus I mentioned? It wasn't just an email blast. It was a mirroring script. Anything that passed through your personal scanner in the last hour was automatically uploaded to a secure cloud folder shared with Arthur Sterling and the FBI. I looked at Julian. He's been playing you, Julian. He's been waiting for you to get desperate enough to do something stupid, like bring a gun to a federal investigation. He doesn't want to save the firm. He wants to be the clean survivor who helps the feds find your offshore accounts in exchange for immunity. Is that true, Marcus? Julian's voice was high, frantic. You were going to hand me over. Julian, she's bluffing, Marcus shouted, but his eyes were darting toward his laptop. She's trying to turn us against each other. I don't need to turn you, I said, my voice cutting through their panic like a scalpel. You were never on the same side. You were just two parasites fighting over the same host. But the host is dead. My father's land isn't a development anymore. As of 10 minutes ago, Arthur Sterling filed an injunction. The merger is dead. The Vance Group is under federal receivership, and you too. You're just two men in a dark room with no way out. I looked at Marcus. The deed in your hand is the only thing that might get you a plea deal. If you shred it, you're not just destroying my house. You're destroying your only exit strategy. Because when they walk through that door, the person holding the evidence is the person who gets to talk first. Julian turned the gun toward Marcus. Give it to me. Give me the folder, Marcus. I can still make it to the airfield. I can still burn the records. You're pathetic, Julian. Marcus spat, finally dropping the nice guy mask entirely. You wouldn't make it to the end of the driveway. I watched them. Two lions, starving and trapped, ready to tear each other apart for a scrap of paper that didn't even belong to them. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I hit a button. Arthur? I said into the speaker. They're both in the library. And Julian has a weapon. You might want to tell the tactical team to hurry. I'd hate for them to ruin the carpet. In the blinding light, I saw Marcus reach for the shredder. I saw Julian lunging for the folder. But as the smoke cleared and the red laser sights began to dance across the room, I saw one more thing. Evelyn. She wasn't downstairs with the police. She was standing in the hidden doorway behind the safe, and she was holding a lighter. If I can't have this life, she whispered, her voice sounding like dry leaves, no one can. Everything happened in slow motion. The FBI tactical team was breaching the main doors, their boots thundering like a heartbeat. Julian was screaming at Marcus. Marcus was clutching the deed, but my eyes were locked on Evelyn. She stood in the shadows of the secret passage, the small flame of her lighter dancing in her eyes. She wasn't looking at the money. She wasn't looking at the police. She was looking at me. You think you're the only one who knows the history of this land, Maya. Evelyn said, her voice eerily calm amidst the chaos. You think Silas Thorne was just a victim? Evelyn, stop! Julian shrieked, dropping his gun and lunging toward the flames. He didn't care about the crime anymore. He cared about the mansion, his golden cage. But Evelyn didn't move. She reached into her bodice and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. My breath hitched. I knew that locket. I had seen it in old photographs of my mother. My mother. I choked out, the smoke beginning to burn my lungs. How do you have that? Your mother didn't just lose this house. Maya, Evelyn hissed over the roar of the fire. She gave it to me. She gave it to us to keep your father quiet. Because Silas Thorne wasn't a hero. He was a man with a secret that would have sent him to prison for the rest of his life. I felt like the floor had vanished beneath my feet. The narrative I had built my entire life around the mouse seeking justice for her saintly father was cracking. You're lying, I whispered, stepping toward her through the haze. He loved this land. He died for it. He died for the shame of it. Evelyn laughed, a jagged, broken sound. He didn't lose the land in a loophole, Maya. He sold it to Julian's father to cover up the fact that he'd embezzled the Thorne family trust into nothingness. He was a fraud. And your mother? She was my sister. My sister. The room spun. Evelyn wasn't just my enemy, she was my blood. My mother's estranged sister who had married into the enemy's camp to reclaim the status my father had gambled away. Everything I thought I knew about my revenge was a lie. I wasn't the daughter of a martyr. I was the niece of a traitor, fighting the daughter of a thief. The tactical team swarmed the room. Julian was tackled near the burning curtains. Marcus tried to shove the deed into the shredder, but a red laser dot centered on his forehead, freezing him in place. I stood in the center of the burning library, the smoke swirling around me like a shroud. I looked at the manila folder in Marcus's shaking hand. If I let it burn, the secret of my father's shame dies with it. I can walk away, let the Vances go to prison for their own corporate crimes, and live my life. But if I take that paper, I take the truth. All of it. The glory and the rot. I didn't look at the police. I didn't look at Evelyn. I lunged through the flames toward Marcus and the shredder. Maya, no. It's going to collapse. Arthur Sterling's voice echoed from the doorway. I didn't stop. I reached into the heat. My hand closed around the folder just as a burning timber fell between me and the exit. I was trapped. With the truth in my hands and a ceiling about to fall. The world was gray. Thick, chemical mist from the sprinklers mixed with the black smoke of the burning library. I was on my knees, the manila folder clutched to my chest. My skin stung from the heat, and my mother's silk dress was a soaked, blackened rag. I felt a hand grab my shoulder. It wasn't the rough grip of a guard or the desperate clawing of Julian. It was firm. Professional. I've got her. Move, move. I was hoisted up. I saw the red laser sights of the FBI team cutting through the mist like lightsabers. They were dragging Julian and Marcus out in zip ties. Evelyn was being led away, her face a mask of cold, silent fury. As they pulled me toward the air, I didn't look at the exit. I looked at the folder, the wet ink deed, the proof of the theft, and the proof of my father's shame. I had exactly 60 seconds before I was processed as a witness, 60 seconds to decide if Maya Thorne was going to be a victim of history, or the person who rewrote it. They sat me on the back of an ambulance. An EMT draped a shock blanket over my shoulders, the silver foil crinkling in my ears. The cold night air hit my lungs, and for the first time in 3 years I could breathe. Arthur Sterling walked toward me, his expensive shoes ruined by the mud and ash. He looked at the folder in my lap. You got it, he said, his voice hushed. The FBI wants to see that document, Maya. It's the smoking gun for the fraud charges. No, I said. Sterling blinked. What do you mean, no? The fraud charges are built on the digital files I already sent, I said, my voice steadying. This paper, this is property law. This is about the land. If I hand this to the federal government now, it becomes evidence in a trial that will last 10 years. The land will be tied up in litigation until I'm old and gray. I looked Sterling in the eye. I'm not giving it to them. I'm going to use it to perform a hostile takeover of what's left of the Vance Group before the sun comes up. Julian is finished, I told Sterling. But the firm's assets, the contracts, the equipment, the Crystal Tower, those are still up for grabs. The board of directors is meeting at 4 a.m. at the downtown Marriott to discuss the emergency liquidation. I opened the folder and pulled out a smaller, hidden slip of paper one-eyed swiped from Julian's desk in the chaos. It was his private ledger of board members' personal contributions. Julian didn't just steal my land, Arthur. He bought the loyalty of his board with embezzled sterling funds. If I walk into that meeting with this ledger and the original deed, I don't just get my land back. I get the company. Sterling looked at me, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He realized he wasn't looking at an assistant anymore. He was looking at a successor. The board will never vote for an intern, Sterling challenged. They won't be voting for an intern, I replied. They'll be voting for the only person who can keep them out of a federal prison. I'm going to offer them a choice: sign the firm over to the Thorne estate for $1, or I hand this ledger to the lead agent standing 10 feet away. I stood up, shedding the silver shock blanket. My dress was ruined, but underneath, I was forged in fire. Mr. Sterling, I said, I need your car. And I need your lead counsel. We have 90 minutes to draft a merger in reverse. And what about Evelyn's claim? Sterling asked. About your father? I looked at the burning mansion behind me. My father made his choices. But he's not here to answer for them. I am. And the first thing I'm going to do as the new CEO of Thorne Vance is tear this house down. But as we sped toward downtown, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I swiped it open. It was a video file. I hit play. It was a recording from 30 minutes ago. Inside the library. It showed me lunging for the folder. But it also showed something else. It showed me grabbing a second, smaller envelope from the safe. An envelope I didn't remember taking. A voice came over the speaker, smooth, distorted, and dangerous. Congratulations on the takeover, Maya. But before you walk into that boardroom, you might want to look at what's inside that second envelope. It turns out, your mother didn't just have a sister, she had a debt. And now, you've inherited it. Did you see that? The moment she thought she was in control, the shadows reached out and pulled her back. Most of you are probably cheering right now. You think she's won. But in this world, winning just means you've traded one predator for another. If you want to know what was in that second envelope, if you're brave enough to face the real cost of power, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't be the person who stops halfway through the truth. And for the ones who think she should have just gone home, go to the comments. Tell me why you're so afraid of a woman who fights back. I'm waiting to see who's really paying attention. The second envelope. It was small, unassuming, and yellowed with age. It had been tucked into the back of the safe, behind the property deeds and the lists of offshore accounts. It felt heavier than the millions of dollars Julian Vance had stolen. It felt like a gravestone. I sat in the back of Arthur Sterling's town car, the city lights of Miami blurring into long, neon streaks. I looked at the envelope. My name was written on it in my mother's handwriting. Not the shaky, panicked script of her final days, but the elegant, certain hand she had when I was a child. Inside was a single photograph and a letter. The photograph was of two women standing on the very land where the Crystal Tower now stands. My mother and Evelyn. They were laughing. They looked like twins, but it was the date on the back that stopped my heart. August 14th, 2005, the day my father lost the land. Maya. The letter began. If you are reading this, it means you've returned to the house I tried so hard to leave. You were always like Silas, stubborn, seeking justice where there is only survival. I felt a tear trail through the soot on my cheek. The Vances didn't steal the land, Maya. I gave it to them. I traded our legacy to buy your father's freedom. He didn't just embezzle the trust. He took a loan from people who don't use lawyers to collect debts. Julian Vance wasn't the monster, then he was the shield. I made a deal with my sister. I would give the Vances the land, and they would make the debt disappear. I chose your life over our name. I looked out at the Miami skyline. The Crystal Tower was visible in the distance, a glowing needle of glass. I had spent 10 years hating Julian Vance for being a thief. But in the twisted logic of the elite, he had been a savior. A predator who charged a 100% interest rate, but a savior nonetheless. We're here, Maya. Arthur Sterling's voice broke the silence. We were in front of the Marriott. The board of directors was waiting. The lions were in the pit, and I was supposed to go in there and take their heads. But I felt hollow. Every move I'd made was based on the idea that my father was an innocent man and Julian was a demon. Now I knew the truth was gray. It was all gray. Are you okay? Sterling asked, looking at the letter in my hand. I just found out my father was a criminal and my mother was a martyr for a lie, I said. And I'm about to go into that room and pretend I'm the moral authority. I looked at my reflection in the car window. The soot, the ruined dress, the hard, cold eyes. But you know what the difference is, Mr. Sterling? I asked, crumpling the letter and stuffing it back into my clutch. Julian and Marcus do bad things for power. My mother did a bad thing for love. And I'm about to do a bad thing for justice. I think that's a trade I can live with. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The Marriott lobby was a swarm of suits and security. I saw them, the board members. Men and women who had profited from my family's misery for 2 decades. One of them, a man named Henderson, stepped forward. He looked at me with pure disgust. You're not coming in here, girl. This is a private board meeting. The police might have Julian, but the company still belongs to us. I didn't say a word. I simply reached into the folder and pulled out the original deed, the one that still bore the Thorne family seal. Actually, Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice projecting through the lobby, the land this company is registered to has reverted to its original owner due to a fraudulent conveyance clause in the 2005 contract. Which means, as of 3 minutes ago, this meeting is taking place on my property. And I'm not here to talk. I'm here to evict you. I walked past him, my head held high. But as I entered the elevator, I saw Marcus being led through the lobby in handcuffs by the FBI. He looked at me, and for a split second he smiled. He leaned toward the agent and whispered something. The agent looked at me, his expression turning from professional to suspicious. He reached for his radio. Dispatch, this is Agent Miller. I need a secondary check on the Thorne-Vance merger files. We might have a second conspirator. The elevator doors closed. I was trapped in a 4-foot by 4-foot box, headed for the top floor, with the FBI now looking at me as the villain. The penthouse suite of the Marriott was a battlefield. Smoke from expensive cigars hung in the air like a shroud. These weren't the creative architects. These were the vultures, the money men, the legal hounds, the people who keep the machine running when the figurehead falls. I walked in, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The arguing stopped. 20 pairs of eyes fixed on me. I was a mess suit on my forehead, my mother's dress torn at the hem, my skin pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. To them, I looked like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. The meeting is closed, Miss Thorne, a voice boomed. It was Diane Sterling, Arthur's ex-wife and the lead counsel for the board. She was a woman made of titanium and ice water. Arthur hadn't mentioned she'd be here. I have the deed, Diane, I said, throwing the folder onto the massive glass table. It slid across the surface, stopping right in front of her. And I have the ledger of every kickback Julian paid to this room. If you want to avoid a RICO indictment, you'll sign the restructuring agreement now. Diane didn't look at the deed. She looked at me, a pitying smile on her lips. The deed is impressive, Maya, truly. It proves Julian is a thief, she said. But it doesn't prove you own the company. You see, when Julian realized the FBI was closing in 6 months ago, he didn't just hide assets. He moved the entirety of the Vance Group's debt into a shell company. My blood went cold. A shell company called Thorne Legacy Holdings, Diane continued, pulling a document from her own briefcase. He used your name, Maya. He used your social security number, the one you provided on your employment forms. Legally speaking, you aren't the heir to a fortune. You are the sole owner of a company that owes the IRS and the Sterling Group $300 million. I felt the walls closing in. He hadn't just stolen my past. He'd booby-trapped my future. If I claimed the land, I claimed the debt. If I took the company, I took the handcuffs. And there's more, Diane said, sliding her phone toward me. On the screen was a news alert. Internal whistleblower claims Maya Thorne co-conspired in Vance fraud to extort board. It was the statement Marcus had whispered to the FBI. He had turned the narrative. He was making it look like I wasn't the victim but the mastermind who had used my father's history to blackmail the Vances. The FBI is downstairs, Maya. Diane said, her voice like a velvet noose. They aren't here for Julian anymore. They're here for the person who has the stolen documents in her hand. Unless what? I whispered. Unless you sign the land over to me, Diane said. I can make the Thorne legacy debt disappear. I can tell the FBI you were an undercover informant working for my legal team. You walk away with your freedom and a 5-figure consulting fee. You lose the land, but you stay out of prison. I looked around the room. These people were smiling. They were the ones who had watched the Vances destroy my father, and now they were watching Diane destroy me. I looked at the pen in Diane's hand. I thought about the letter in my clutch. My mother's sacrifice. My father's shame. No, I said. Maya, don't be a fool, Diane hissed. The police are at the door. Then let them in, I said, my voice rising until it shook the glass of the windows. Because I'm not signing anything. If you want this land, you're going to have to take it from me in a courtroom while the whole world watches you explain why you're using a dead man's debt to bully an orphan. I turned, expecting the FBI. But it wasn't the FBI. It was Arthur Sterling. And he wasn't alone. He was holding a tablet, and he looked like he'd just seen a ghost. Diane, stop, Arthur said, his voice trembling. We just got the secondary forensic report on the 2005 files. The ones Maya's virus mirrored. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was real fear in his eyes. Maya. Your father didn't just embezzle the trust. He was murdered. And the person who authorized the hit is sitting in this room. The word murder didn't just hang in the air. It felt like it had sucked the oxygen out of the room. I looked at Arthur Sterling. He was standing in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes locked on a man sitting at the far end of the table. Mr. Henderson. The man who had tried to block my entry. The man who had been the Vance Group's fixer for 30 years. He was currently holding a glass of scotch, but his hand was frozen midair. Arthur, don't be ridiculous, Diane Sterling said, though her voice had lost its titanium edge. Silas Thorne died of a myocardial infarction in a hospital bed. It's a matter of public record. The record was bought, Diane, Arthur said, stepping into the room and placing the tablet on the glass table. Maya's virus didn't just mirror Julian's emails. It mirrored his legacy folder, the one encrypted with a double-blind key. It contains the payouts to the medical examiner. And it contains a recording. He's not signing, Henderson. He's going to the press about the deed. The merger will die before it starts. He's on a ventilator, Julian. He's weak. A small error in his potassium levels. The machines won't even flag it until it's too late. It'll look like his heart just gave out. The family gets a small settlement, and we get the land. It's cleaner this way. I couldn't move. My lungs felt like they were filled with lead. I had spent years thinking my father was a weak man who had given up. I had hated him for his shame. But he didn't give up. He was fighting them until his last breath. And they didn't just steal his land, they stole his life because they couldn't break him. That recording is inadmissible. Henderson screamed, his face turning a mottled purple. It's a private communication. It was stolen via a cyber attack. I stood up. I didn't feel like a mouse anymore. I didn't even feel like an assistant. I felt like the hand of fate itself. It's not just a recording, Henderson, I said, my voice cutting through his panic. I walked toward him, the board members parting like the Red Sea. The potassium error you mentioned? It left a trace. One that a new autopsy authorized by the next of kin will find in a heartbeat. And since I'm the next of kin, and I'm currently standing on the land you killed for, I looked at the FBI agents standing by the door. Agent Miller? You were looking for a second conspirator? I think you just found the primary one. The room was in chaos. Board members were whispering, some trying to slip out the back, others looking at me with newfound terror. Diane Sterling was staring at her own documents, realizing she had been defending a murder syndicate. I turned to Arthur. Is it all there? The proof of the payout? Every cent, Arthur said. Traced back to the Vance Group's operating expenses. They literally billed his murder to the company. I turned back to the board. The debt Diane mentioned. The $300 million Julian put in my name. Under the Slayer rule of Florida law, no one can profit from a crime they committed. Since the debt was created to facilitate the theft and murder of Silas Thorne, that debt is legally void. But the assets? The contracts? The Crystal Tower? I picked up the pen Diane had tried to force on me. Those belonged to the victim's estate. Me. I sat at the head of the table. The seat Julian Vance had occupied for 2 decades. Now, I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence, let's talk about the first thing we're going to do. We're going to liquidate every personal asset of every person in this room who knew about that recording, and we're going to start with your homes. But as I looked at the board, Arthur Sterling leaned in and whispered in my ear, Maya, there's one more file. One that just finished decrypting. It's about the sovereign account. The one Julian was using to pay a third party. Someone outside the firm. I looked at the name on the screen. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't a business partner. It wasn't a lawyer. It was my mother's name. And the payments had started after my father was buried. I sat in the darkened office adjacent to the boardroom. The sun was officially up, bleeding a bruised purple and orange across the Miami horizon. I should have felt like a queen. I had the board in a chokehold. I had the deed. I had the killers in handcuffs. But the name on that screen, Alara Thorne, felt like a brand on my soul. Monthly payments, $5,000, $10,000. Always through a sovereign account linked to a shell company Julian Vance owned. They started 2 weeks after my father's funeral and ended the day my mother died in that hospice bed. My mother wasn't a victim of the Vances. She was their silent partner. I looked at the letter again. I chose your life over our name. I finally understood the weight of those words. She knew. She knew they had killed him. She didn't have the proof. Or maybe she was too afraid to look for it. So she took the money. She took the blood money to pay for my private school, for our tiny apartment, for the very clothes I wore while I mourned a man she knew had been murdered. She bought my future with my father's silence. I felt a surge of nausea. I looked at the crystal tower outside the window. I had spent my life trying to save her memory from the Vances, not realizing she had been woven into their web by choice. Arthur, I said, my voice cold as the Atlantic at midnight. Arthur Sterling stepped into the room. The FBI is asking for the sovereign logs, Maya. If we give them the full file, your mother's name, it will be in the public record. The Thorne name won't be a symbol of justice, it'll be a symbol of complicity. I looked at the bank logs. I could delete them. With my access, I could wipe the sovereign files and keep my mother's saintly image intact. I could be the hero the city wanted. No, I said. Burn it all down. Maya? The Vances, Henderson, the board. And the lies, I said, standing up. My mother made her choice. She chose a comfortable lie to protect me. But I am not an 8-year-old girl anymore. I don't need protection. I need the truth to be the only thing left standing. I turned to the computer and initiated a global transfer. Not to my account. Not to the Thorne estate. I'm liquidating the sovereign account, I announced to the empty room. Every dollar of that blood money is being transferred to the Florida Innocence Project and a fund for families displaced by Vance developments. And the logs? Send them to the lead prosecutor. All of them. I walked back into the boardroom. The remaining members, the ones not in cuffs, shrank back. They expected me to negotiate. They expected me to offer them a deal to keep their names out of the press. I threw a stack of papers onto the table. These are your voluntary resignations, I said. Effective immediately. You will forfeit your stock options, your bonuses, and your severance. In exchange, I won't tell the SEC about the second offshore account I found this morning, the one you used to hide the Sterling merger kickbacks. You can't do this. One woman cried. We have contracts. You had a contract with Julian Vance, I said, leaning over the table until I was inches from her face. But Julian Vance is currently in a holding cell explaining why he authorized a lethal dose of potassium for a business rival. You are now working for Maya Thorne. And my first order of business? You're fired. Escort them out, I said. As the board was cleared, Arthur Sterling walked up to me. He held a single, original document. The real, wet ink deed. It's yours, Maya. Truly yours. The company, the land, the legacy. I took the paper. It felt light, too light. Wait, Arthur said, looking at his phone. There's someone in the lobby. She says she won't leave until she speaks to the new owner. She says she has something that wasn't in the safe. I looked at the security feed. It was a woman in her late 60s. She was wearing a simple floral dress, the kind my mother used to wear. She looked exactly like my mother would have looked if she had lived. I watched the floor numbers tick down on the digital display. 30. 20. 10. For 3 years, I had ascended this building as a ghost, a nobody, a mouse. Now, I was descending it as the owner of the very ground it stood upon. But as the doors opened into the marble lobby, I didn't feel like a victor. I felt like a child looking for a home that no longer existed. The lobby was flooded with the early morning Miami sun, the light reflecting off the white stone so brightly it hurt my eyes. And there, sitting on a velvet bench near the fountain, was the woman. She didn't look like the elite. She didn't wear Chanel or carry a bag that cost a year's rent. She wore a simple faded floral dress and held a worn leather satchel on her lap. When she looked up, my heart stopped. She had my mother's eyes. Not the tired, defeated eyes of the woman who died in a hospice bed, but the bright, fierce eyes from the old photographs. "You look just like her," the woman said. Her voice was like dry parchment, but it held a strength that made me pause. "Except for the chin. You have Silas's chin. Always lead with it," he did. "Who are you?" I asked. My voice sounded small in the vastness of my own lobby. "My name is Elena," she said, standing up slowly. "I was your father's assistant, long before the Vances turned this city into a playground for thieves. And I'm the woman who helped your mother hide the one thing Julian Vance could never find." She pulled out a small, wooden box. It wasn't fancy. It was hand-carved, smelling of cedar and thyme. "Julian thought he bought your mother's silence," Elena said, her eyes searching mine, "and she let him think that. She took his money because she knew it was the only way to keep the Vances from looking too closely at you, but she didn't take it for herself. She took it to fund the search." "The search for what?" "For the truth of the trust," Elena whispered, opening the box. Inside wasn't money. It wasn't a deed. It was a collection of letters, handwritten by my father from his hospital bed, smuggled out by this woman. "Your father didn't embezzle that trust, Maya. He moved it. He saw the Vances coming a year before they struck. He didn't lose the Thorn legacy, he hid it in a blind trust that only his heir could unlock. But it required the sovereign key. Something your mother spent her last breath ensuring you would eventually find." I reached out and touched the letters. They weren't documents of shame. They were instructions. A map to a legacy that wasn't built on glass and steel, but on the very community the Vances had tried to erase. I realized then that my revenge had been a straight line, but my parents' love had been a circle. My mother wasn't a partner in the crime. She was the guardian of the exit strategy. She played the villain so I could grow up to be the judge. "The money in the sovereign account," I said, my voice finally finding its true strength. "The blood money. I already gave it away." Elena smiled, a small, knowing tilt of the lips. "Good. Your father would have hated that money anyway. He always said wealth isn't what you take from the land. It's what you leave behind for the people who walk on it." "Miss Thorne." "Maya. Is it true you've dissolved the board?" "Maya, what are your plans for the Crystal Tower?" I looked at the cameras. I looked at the mouse I used to be, and the CEO the world wanted me to be. I turned back to Elena. "Tell me," I whispered. "Where did my father really want this money to go?" Elena leaned in, her voice a secret meant only for me. "He didn't want a tower, Maya. He wanted a garden. And he wanted you to be the one to plant the first seed." I stepped toward the reporters, but I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at the white marble floor. I could almost see the cracks forming. I could almost see the grass pushing through. They called it the death of the Crystal Tower. 6 months after that night in the library, I stood on the deck of a ferry in Miami Bay, watching the skyline change forever. The glass spire that Julian Vance had built on my father's stolen dreams was being dismantled, piece by piece. I didn't sell the building to another developer. I didn't turn it into luxury condos. I used the sovereign trust my father had hidden, the one unlocked by that silver key, to fund a radical reimagining. The tower wasn't coming down to make room for another cage of steel. It was being hollowed out to become the Thorne Memorial Conservatory, the largest vertical public garden in the world. They say the elite don't see people. But now they have no choice but to see the green. They have to see the life that grew from the cracks of their corruption. Julian Vance didn't survive the first month in prison. Without his silk suits and his board members to protect him, he was just a frail man with a mountain of debts he couldn't pay. Evelyn. My aunt. She's in a minimum security facility in Central Florida. She still writes to me, asking for money, asking for a family visit. I haven't answered. Some bridges aren't just burned. They are erased from the map. And Marcus? The man who wanted to be the new king? He took a plea deal. He's barred from practicing law for life, living in a studio apartment in a city that has forgotten his name. He wanted a legacy. Now he's just a footnote in a case study on corporate greed. I walked through the lobby of the new conservatory this morning. The marble was gone, replaced by reclaimed wood and living moss walls. Elena was there, the woman from the lobby. She's the head of the Thorn Foundation now, ensuring that every cent we make goes back into the neighborhood the Vances tried to destroy. I realize now that my mother's choice wasn't a betrayal. It was a bridge. She knew that the truth is a fire that can consume you if you're not strong enough to hold the torch. She waited until I was ready. She waited until the mouse had grown claws. Revenge isn't about taking back what you lost. You can never truly get back the years, or the people, or the floral dresses that have turned to ash. Real justice is making sure that the people who come after you don't have to fight the same war. My name is Maya Thorn. I am the daughter of a martyr, the niece of a traitor, and the woman who broke the glass ceiling literally. And if you're listening to this, if you're the person in the polyester suit, carrying the coffee, feeling invisible, just remember one thing. The ghosts are always watching. And sometimes, the ghosts decide it's time to speak. You've been here with me. You've seen the fire, the betrayal, and the restoration. If you're still here, you're part of this legacy now. But most of you will close this video and go back to your lives, letting the bullies in your world win because it's easier. Don't be that person. Hit that subscribe button right now. Stand with the Thorn legacy. If you don't subscribe, if you're too indifferent to take a side, then go to the comments. Tell me why you're okay with living in a world owned by the Julian Vances. Tell me why you'd rather be a ghost than a gardener. I'm waiting to see who's truly awake.